Well, so last time I did a very theoretical, not very theoretical, but theoretical um, sort of exposition of Pureland Buddhism, little bit of the history, little bit about the sutras and so on. So now, today we thought those who have practiced, I mean, I know Siddharth definitely, if anybody else too, they could share a little bit about that experience. Then we could have a discussion, which we didn't have time for last time, and also maybe a Q&A. So, but if you wish, I could just go over quickly the points that we discussed. So it refreshes you, and if last time you had some question, it may pop up in your mind again this time.
Yeah, yeah.
So basically, we looked at first the three sutras on which the Pureland Buddhist practice is based. And that is the long Sukhavati Sutra, the shorter Sukhavati Sutra, and the Amitayur Dhyana Sutra. These are the three main sutras. Then, of course, we saw that the essential practice is to pay homage to keep repeating and recollecting the name of Amitabha Buddha, who is the sutra, who is the Buddha of the Sukhavati Sutra. So the essential practice is this recitation. Other practices are also there, for instance, like visualizing the Pure Land, because there is a very vivid and colorful description of the Pure Land in all these sutras. So it can also be as a visualization guide. And there is also what they call a dharani, which is like a sort of a spell, you might say, from our fairy book stories. A dharani is a Sanskrit sort of, in fact, for instance, some of the dharanis in the Lotus Sutra, which are there in full in that chapter, you cannot make head or tail of it. We don't know what language it is. It sounds like gibberish. This one is not like that. This one is Sanskrit words and it means something. So these are the three methods. Now, when we look at the history of how this practice started, what is to be highlighted is that we are looking at that whereas Pureland Buddhism historically was there right in China and in India perhaps from 147 AD, 147 CE, Common Era. And that came from Kushan, went to China, went to Tibet, went to Korea, and finally landed in Japan. So one way of looking at Pureland Buddhism is to look at this entire history of this practice and its study based on these three sutras. The other is when we say Pureland Buddhism, most of the reference today is to the Pureland sects in Japan, which were the most active and which revived the whole practice as a day-to-day practice, not just something to be done in the monastery as recitation of sutra and so on. And that is in the 12th to 14th century Japan. And as I was explaining last time, and we did this earlier also with Lotus Sutra, this is the new Kamakura Buddhism period. And 2-3 characteristics of that period was one, that they all believed that we were now in the dharma ending age, where the dharma of Shakyamuni Buddha is in a decline and is finished. So they had divided the period after Buddha's passing away to 3 periods, 1,000 year, 1,000 year, and then 10,000 years. So when you look at 12th, 13th century Japan, you're looking at almost like 1800 to 1900 years after the Buddha's passing. So they were very clear that we are now entering this age, and there were prophecies in those sutras and the Amitabha Sutra and even the Diamond Sutra and so on, that this age, when it starts, the Dharma will be in decline. Only the Amitabha Sutra will remain. It is the simplest practice that people can do. And that's why the emphasis that we have to do this. So this was one characteristic. Second was that all these guys who started these various sects, like Honen, who started Pureland, then Nichiren, who started the Nichiren practice, Lotus Sutra practice, Kukai, who started the Shingon practice. These are the esoteric practices, tantric, which came from Tibet. What else? Zen, who was the guy?
Dogen.
Dogen, yeah. These 3-4 guys all came themselves from the Tiantai tradition of China and of Japan earlier. So Tiantai in China, Tendai in Japan. So they all had their grounding there. So that's the second aspect. And third, of course, that there was constant rivalry and fighting and debates. And later on, after the 14th century, it became much worse and it sort of degenerated almost into physical wars. So the other aspect was that each one felt that their practice was the most important because their own sutras said that the practice is important. Now, this is like, as I explained at one point in the past, like say, who is the best Buddhist teacher? Aspi. How do you know? Aspi told me so. No, that is no validation. Which is the greatest sutra? Lotus Sutra. Why? Because Lotus Sutra itself says it is the greatest sutra ever. But all these sutras say the same thing. The Pureland Sutra says about itself the same thing. That because these were written later on, these are Mahayana sutras, and maybe there were additions also by the monks who followed these practices. Anyway, so that's the other characteristic. So they all felt. So now Nichiren would say that ours is the greatest. Why? Because it is all inclusive. And secondly, it was preached by Shakyamuni, who is the Buddha of our land, where we are born and where we suffer. Whereas Amitabha is in the Western continent. Where is we connected to us over here? And Tobia is in the other Eastern continent. And why are we talking about tantric deities that we humans have a Buddha amongst us in this age, that is Shakyamuni? The Pureland people would say, well, you know, that is very intellectual, and this Tiantai practice is extremely difficult to do. 3,000 words in an instant of consciousness to even understand it. So that is good for scholars, monks, and intellectuals. Zen, because of its minimalist sort of approach, just sit down and do nothing. They said, oh, see, that is the sort of discipline that the samurai like, you know, so the royalty and the samurai, the court and the courtesans, they would be more inclined to do that Zen practice. Shingon again is tantric, requires discipline. It's not something you can do day to day. So they said, well, the Pureland practice is the only one which everybody can do, whether you're a king or a commoner, whether you're a peasant or a soldier, you can just do this practice because all that it requires is this. So when we look at some of these characteristics, and then go into the history of Pureland Buddhism itself, as I said, it was started by Honen, who had his background in Tiantai, and his approach became what is now known Jodo Shu. His disciple Shinran then created another subsect, and it became another major sect, Jodo Shinshu. And like that, there were two other sects, and then even a Zen sect which had incorporated the Nembutsu, the practice of chanting Amitabha's name, into their practice. And we also saw then that, you know, Honen's approach was that this is a practice, but it has to be done in the context of developing bodhi mind, understanding emptiness, and all the other things that go with the complete Buddhist philosophy. Whereas Shinran, his own disciple, rebelled against that, so to say. Rebel may be a strong word, but in his discourses, in his tracts that he wrote, said, well, you're again going back to all this intellectualizing and book knowledge. All that is needed is just chanting this name. And Amitabha will appear before you, and you will be taken straight into Sukhavati, and the next rebirth, next birth will be there, and after that, that's the last life, and you'll reach enlightenment. And of course, Honen used to distinguish between awakening and enlightenment. That yes, knowing about all this is awakening, but actually going on the path is the path which takes you to enlightenment, when you have developed the bodhi mind fully. And then the whole idea that, well, you know, when we say that Amitabha will appear before you, and the self-power and other power. So I'll just read that last bit, with which I started last time. And then we just open up. I mean, Siddharth can carry on with how he came to Buddhism, Pureland. Don't forget, we also had one lady from England, I forget her name, who had, yes, what was her name, Siddharth?
Satya Robin.
That's right. And she had done a full session also on Pureland. But she was, of course, talking about her experiences in England and how she came to Pureland in England. And she was an activist, I think. So this one paragraph sort of puts in a nutshell what Honen started with. What, of course, is being practiced today is just a pure recitation of the Buddha's name. In practice, the most common technique of the Pure Land is the recitation of Amitabha Buddha's name. Along with this popular form of Pure Land, there is also a higher aspect. Now, who is speaking? This is that Vietnamese monk who represents Pure Land in Vietnam. And they follow Honen. Most of the things outside Japan are Honen's Pure Land, Jodoshu. There's also a higher aspect in which Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light and life, is equated with our Buddha nature, infinitely bright and everlasting. So, not to be only seen as an outward deity or a Buddha outside of you, but as your own Buddha nature, as a manifestation of your own Buddha nature. And this falls in line with his understanding that because we are chanting to Amitabha Buddha doesn't mean we are now in a dualistic worldview. That there is me and there is Amitabha Buddha, and he has to, with his grace, save me. So we are still in a non-dual world. Then how do you reconcile this? Who are we chanting to, or whose name are we taking when we say Namo Amitabha? If we are in a non-dual, everything is connected sort of a world or universe or life or whatever. So this was more or less the outline of things, and with some few details that I did last time. So I'm sure now more questions would have come to your mind, reflecting on last time's experience, exposure to this. And maybe now we can carry on with, maybe Siddharth, you may want to say something or add to what is there or subtract from it.
You have covered everything, Aspi. I came into to know the Pure Land tradition through David Brazier, also known as Dharma Vidya, who lives in France. And he's the founder of this tradition, which Satya is a part of. So I went and stayed with him for a couple of days in France and found him a very interesting and inspiring person. What is attractive about Pure Land is the notion that everybody can be saved. And that, the notion of bamboo, that we are all foolish beings, that on our own, we cannot be saved. And there is this other power we need to beseech, whether this other power is somebody outside you or within you, but this other power is necessary. And if you just recite, Namo Amidaya or Namo Amitabha 10 times a day, you are sure to be born into the Pure Land, after which Buddhahood is easy. You'll definitely attain it. So what is attractive is the simplicity of it. You don't have to sit, observing your breath or in quiet meditation. Whenever you can, you just do this chanting. And even somebody like David Brazier, all he did was just chant. He never sat in the, meditation like many of the other Buddhist traditions do. So this, in a way, is completely unintellectual, attractive, and in the midst of a busy day, every now and then you just need to do this chanting. So, as Aspi said, it's known as Nembutsu, this remembering the Buddha, this being mindful of the Buddha, evoking the Buddha, of course, Amitabha Buddha. So I think this is basically it, that the simplicity of it, that all you have to do is chant Amitabha's name, or Amida in, as he's referred to in the Japanese traditions. And it doesn't matter how depraved you are. Amitabha will not let you down. So there is this sense of hope that, we are all, to use a kind of a Christian expression, we're all fallen human beings. And Amitabha will accept everybody. And all you have to do is chant. So it's the utter simplicity of it which is attractive. The notion that nobody will be left behind. All you have to do is remember the Buddha Amitabha's name, and he will 100% see to it that you are taken to Sukhavati, or the Pure Land, from where Buddhahood is certain. Yeah, so just, to put simply, this is it. And the simplicity of it is what makes it attractive. I think it is, in some places in Japan and Southeast Asia, the largest Buddhist tradition, because it appeals to ordinary human beings who don't want to get into any conceptualization. And I guess in a way, some people find parallels to Christianity, in the Amitabha tradition. Yeah, I'll stop here.
So the chant is Nembutsu or Namo Amitabha?
Nembutsu is not a chant.
Yeah.
Nembutsu is not a chant.
Nembutsu means remembrance, mindfulness. Yeah.
Nembutsu is the title of the practice.
Okay.
I'm practicing Nembutsu, which means I am practicing chanting the name of Amitabha. Now it may be Namo Amitabha, Namo Amida Bu. Bu is Butsu, which is Buddha in Japanese. So Namo Amida or Amitabha and so on. No? So, but there are different variations.
Just a question, Siddhartha, if we say that chanting will, is the thing, and that kind of gets you into, let us say, being born into Pure Land, etc. But that is, you already said it, that saying it's very much like Christianity, and therefore theistic in nature, no? Which is not what Buddhism as a tradition is all about, no? Because the Buddhism talks about, not being theistic. So how does one reconcile that? For me, meditation, for example, is a process. It's not just meditating, but it's a process that you go through, no? In terms of one's own being. And the change comes through that process. So I don't know, I'm just asking this because I'm not able to reconcile this, chanting and achieving nirvana, so to speak.
Yeah, I think at the popular level, perhaps there is a theistic understanding. Aspi already said that, that the Buddha nature within us is really what Amitabha is about. So it's in that sense non-dualistic. But I suspect that among practitioners at the popular level, there is a kind of theistic connotation that, that one is, that Amitabha will save you. So my sense is, that possibly in practice, there is a theistic connotation, even if one can explain it that actually it's non-dual because Amitabha is the Buddha nature within you.
So if I can add a little bit to that, Nafiza. So first of all, Siddharth is completely right that in people's minds, however much, especially those who are not well-read or uneducated or who have not had any exposure to proper sort of Buddhist philosophy, very often Buddha becomes a substitute for a God figure. In fact, in fact, sometimes, say, even in the Ambedkarite converts, they sometimes quietly keep even their old statues of Ganesh and Saraswati and all that, whatever their deities, and along with that may put a Buddha statue. And then they are praying to all of them. I was actually quite surprised because when Rinpoche sent me to Bhutan, it was somewhere in 2008 or 9, to teach students over there. And I mean, I was supposed to teach young men and women, but a person there misunderstood and got me a whole bunch of 300 school children, 7th and 8th standard. And I couldn't talk what I had been originally scheduled, which was about Buddhist modernism, which Rinpoche wanted me to explain. But these guys just didn't know anything because they didn't know what a sutra was, they didn't know what Four Noble Truths. And mind you, Bhutan is a Buddhist country. And just the way we in Christian schools have catechism and moral science and so on, they have their lectures, I mean, weekly 2-3 periods on Buddhist texts and all that. So I sort of changed my whole tact and said like, okay, shall I just do an introduction to Buddhism for you all? And I said, okay. They said, okay. So they enjoyed all that. And then the teachers warned me that now you're coming to the point where you will probably be saying there is no creator God. And then they are going to object because for them, Padmasambhava, who is like the second Buddha for them, in Tibetan Buddhism, is God, it's just like God. So I said, well, let's see what questions they ask, So sure enough, when I brought this point up, 2-3 of these kids challenged me, But when we have exams, we go to a temple and we give coconut to Padmasambhava, that is all meaningless. So, so what I'm trying to say is, yes, they say for us, Padmasambhava is God, not Christ, not this. Padmasambhava is God. So I had to then slowly explain the same thing that, well, that is that person, that he's also a Buddha. Now, who is a Buddha and so on and so forth. So we went to do that. They were sort of satisfied. And what is prayer in Buddhism? Prayer is not just supplication. I give you a coconut, so you give me good marks. It's not transactional. We are only putting the coconut as a symbol. We actually want to offer the whole universe to the Buddhas, but we can't offer the whole universe. So we offer some symbolic gifts and so on and so forth. Now, when people try comparing, when they talk about comparison between Buddhism and Pureland, between Christianity and Pureland Buddhism, or sometimes Sufism and Buddhism, and Vedanta and Buddhism, they are actually latching on to some aspect of each of these religions, not the whole philosophy. So, of course, the key, you just got it. The essence is there is no creator God in Buddhism. So there is no all-powerful God who will grant you, either through grace or because he's happy with you and you follow his law, that he will grant you your wishes. Now, that is the essence, that's an essential difference. But then there are some commonalities. So for instance, when Pureland Buddhists say that, everybody will be saved. Well, that sounds exactly like Christ, that everybody will be saved. There is sin, there is salvation. So these aspects of another power, sin, we are all foolish beings, we all have negative karma, very heavy karma. You remember I said last time about that sort of thing about, light karma or heavy karma, you have to face the consequences. The heavy karma can be carried by a boat on a river, whereas sometimes so basically the thing is that Amitabha and this practice is like the boat which carries your karma. So in that sense, there is a little bit of similarity there.
Aspi,
Yeah.
I think one difference is that Christianity doesn't say that everybody will be saved. There is the
if you come to Jesus, everyone will be saved. If you accept Jesus,
that there is a notion of hell and all
true,
that.
True.
Whereas I think what is attractive in the Amitabha tradition is that everybody will be saved.
Right.
It's almost like it's not our fault that we are foolish or we are depraved or that there is evil within us. That we can all remember Amitabha's name and we will be saved. He won't let us down. That I find is attractive.
Yeah. No, so of course, then you see there are other differences. So for instance, while there is heaven and hell in Buddhism, there is no eternal hell. Yeah, so in Christianity, there may be an eternal hell. Once you are in hell, you are in hell. But here you have another lifetime. So because there are multiple lifetimes that you believe in, then there is another possibility of, redemption. Um, and of course, I mean, in Christian, if you accept Christ in this life, but you have only this life in which to do that, to accept or reject or go to hell or go to heaven with him. So then when you come to Sufism, okay, what is very attractive is the interconnectedness. The idea that God is within me, I am God, I am He, that sort of concept. Now, that is very close to I have Buddha nature inside me. The divine is within me. The Sufi also says divine is within me. But the difference is, for the Sufi also, because it comes from Islam, Allah and He is a dualism. You may say I am divine and the divine is in me, but you have to accept that you cannot be actually Allah. So people latch on to certain similarities. Then there may be meditative practices, which are common in Sufism, Buddhism. Thomas Merton, for instance, talked a lot with the Dalai Lama in dialogues about Christian meditation and Buddhist meditation. The Christian tries to live his life in the imitation of Christ. The Buddhist tries to be like Buddha, to live from the ground of Buddhahood, the Buddha nature within you. So this is, I think, a little difficult if you try to, try to match and map like this, But there are so people have tried this in the past.
The issue here to me is not just theistic versus non-theistic. I think that we will never be able to resolve, as Aspi has also mentioned that number of times. And it really doesn't bother me. I mean, if somebody wants to attribute his inspiration to a creator God or not, it doesn't bother me so much. As long as, and that's the point I am making, the central to Buddhism, as I understand, is compassion and wisdom, or whichever, however one says that. I think that this Pureland Buddhism, or let's put it like this, the heart and the mind, and it's true that we cannot fully understand the hair splitting that goes on in terms of trying to understand the metaphysics related to Buddhism as in any other religion. But when it comes to the heart, I think that's what Siddhartha is saying. The access tends to be more universal. I think that we have mentioned this before in terms of the bhakti movements and so on, why they are popular, because they appeal to the heart and less to the mind in that sense. And here, to me, is the issue. The issue here is that I think focusing on Buddha, whether externally or internally, as we are saying, brings out the factor of compassion. Okay, either you're focused on it or you practice it and you become it and so on. What is compromised in this process, as I see, is the wisdom part. Because I do not know whether, I also believe that we can be sincerely stupid. So it's not that just because you're sincere, you are necessarily right. So the tendency to therefore, think that if you only do this, then everything is fine, and compromises the wisdom part of Buddhism is the way I look at it. I don't know, I'm trying to articulate what difference I see.
So, see, I have had the same experience now because we've been practicing Lotus Sutra for so many years. And the initial first 8-9 years were with the Sukha Gakkai. The same approach was very much there. Just chant and you will get what you want. Don't ask too many questions. Don't get into all this, intellectualizing. No need to read. If you have to read Sensei's guidance, but just chant. So even beginners who came and who started practicing were told. They would always ask, the first question, what is this? What does Namyo or Rengekyo mean? That is, any sensible person would ask that question first. And the answer was always, don't ask this question, just chant and everything will slowly be revealed to you within yourself. You see, now only with reading and only with sort of advancing in the practice, I refuse to adopt this part. I started reading from day one, including their books and other books. And of course, then you come to realize that this is a practice. It's a valid Buddhist practice, but that it comes within the context of a worldview, of a Buddhist worldview. There may be a number of worldviews within Buddhism, mind-only school, Madhyamika school, Vaibhashika school. There are maybe all these schools there, and they have slightly different worldviews, sometimes very different worldviews. Where, Chitta Matrin will say that mind truly exists, and Madhyamika says nothing truly exists. So it's a very different view of things, almost like the God, no God thing. But when you get the whole worldview, then you can understand where the practice falls. So again, now you may say that if you have the capacity, now what about a person who is not literate? You were able to buy these books, you could afford them, you could read them and understand them. What about somebody? Then faith comes in. So this title of the book, for instance, on Pureland, the Buddhism of wisdom and faith. He doesn't just say, he does of course come to compassion inside the book a lot, but he is talking about faith. So then it is pure faith. Then it comes to a mystic understanding of the worldview. There is a Buddha nature, and this practice is allowing you to tap that Buddha nature the way an oil rig goes and taps the oil beneath the surface of the earth and it sprouts forward, your Buddha nature comes forward, and so on. So this is there in everything, I think.
Sorry, I have mentioned this before. I have been trying to try to look into, experiences of trance, especially among traditional healers, and especially women. I don't have anything authoritative to say at this point in time, but I have a band of I know a band of at least 7 tribal women who actually dispense medicine. When you refer your problem to them, they actually go into the forest and they get into a trance and they come back with a solution or a treatment to you. I know this. The point that I've been trying to read is that if you get into a trance, and there are many ways of getting into a trance, something which rationally you may have been able to do or may not have been able to do, somehow gets done rightly, as appropriately as possible. In other words, Aspi, you have told me yourself, this chanting, it is also true that certain things happen to you quite coincidentally, if you want to say, and you have no rational kind of explanations for that. That doesn't necessarily lead you to a belief, but it leads you to, let's say,
faith.
You can, faith is a strong word. You wonder, as to what is the connection. Is there a connection? Or is just a coincidence? And when this happens a number of times to you, then you begin to have faith in that process.
Correct.
And then you can become a practitioner and so on. Faith healing and so on and so forth. My point is that this is not very easily rationally explained. It doesn't mean it's not true.
Correct.
That's the point I'm making.
Yeah, true, very true. So now the point is, it's my mental makeup that I say, no, I reject this explanation you're giving. My leaders in Soka Gakkai, I'm going to read and find out what is the meaning of Namyo and Gekyo. But that may not be the response of everyone. It depends on individual people. There are hundreds and thousands of Soka Gakkai members who have been practicing for 25, 30 years and still cannot explain what is the meaning because they've never really been explained themselves, or they only know the literal meaning of each word. And they have tremendous faith, and faith does work. So obviously these, I mean, if you come back to skillful means, and if you say these are all practices which come from the Buddha, and the whole thing that connects all these diverse practices and even philosophies is the skillful mean of addressing the capacity, time, position, place, all that of each person he wants to sort of save.
I want to add one or
Yes,
two or
yes,
three
please
points.
go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, John C. Good to see you.
Hi.
Hi, sorry to join you late. My
Yeah.
life these days seems to
Your
be
good
one
friend
constant,
Ananta,
mad rush.
your good friend Ananta had dropped in a few days ago, and
Don't tell me about it.
yeah, just 2 or 3 points. One is, this notion of Pure Land. It can be either, this in the West, a separate area, or it can be in this world also. We are not always aware that we are living in the Pure Land. So there are these two views, that it is Sukhavati out there, or it can be here. The other thing I find attractive is that you don't have to succeed in becoming a perfect human being. All you need is to keep trying. And, most likely you won't succeed. You will remain lost and fallen and all that. But that doesn't, Amitabha won't reject you because of that. I think I find this very attractive. That, in many of the other schools of Buddhism, you may have to, wait for eons of years before you attain Buddhahood, and several births and all that. Here, that is not expected. That you can be born. Amitabha will take you into the Pure Land as you are, provided you make an effort. You may not succeed in becoming perfect, but you make an effort. Then I think in practice, I think Dominic mentioned it. Both the notion of other power and self-power, we experience it at different times. It's not that these are mutually exclusive things. There are times when the self-power fails you, and the other, you look up to the other power. So to my mind, these are not mutually exclusive. Yeah.
No, interestingly, when Christian missionaries started coming back into Japan after 1868, they were very interested in Pure Land Buddhism because a lot of them saw it as a kind of proto-Christianity, a salvation religion in a sense with certain kind of parallels. I think they got disabused fairly quickly, but it's quite interesting to see their response to it. This is not bad. And in Japan, Pure Land Buddhism is the majority practice. So I don't know how long it took them to find out that it didn't necessarily work exactly that way, but I thought that was rather interesting. This, in a sense of a salvation religion. You had to do something, but there was another kind of other power that would.
We touched upon this.
Yeah.
We touched upon this before you came, that there is other power, there is sin, and there is salvation. That gives you a sort of
Yeah, but I have this, fear with this Pure Land Buddhism that instead of leading to awakening, it may lead to further sleeping, actually.
No, I think remembrance of the Buddha's name is a form of mindfulness. And
but you see,
so it doesn't make you sleep. It can have the same effect as the other forms of self-power,
Yeah, if you substitute trance for sleep, it does make sense. because even in the Christian tradition, and I know this also in other religious traditions, other religion traditions, about repeating the name, both in Hinduism and you have that japa or whatever you call it. We have this rosary practice and this whole idea of Jesus' name. See, so you see that, so this constant repetition gets you into, let's put, instead of using the word trance, into centering yourself to whatever that is your center, which then opens up a whole new world, maybe related to compassion and so on. But what is still, missing for me, and I think it's important, is the wisdom part. Where you locate this, if not now, but over a period of time. Otherwise, this whole idea of awakening doesn't make sense. What is awakening then? I mean,
But,
there's a paradox here. At one level, I feel you need to submit yourself to, it's not clear to what, but that you are not necessarily leading the process in that sense. And so,
but if you look at the Hindu tradition of jnana and bhakti, you find love more present in the bhakti traditions. The jnana tradition, the sense of oneness and all that, quite often compassion and love is missing in it. And I think as the way Advaita is practiced in India, it is almost like, compassion doesn't play a role. Whereas in the bhakti tradition, this love of God overflows into the love, into love for all beings.
But Aspi, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of, the wisdom tradition, that is, so for example, Madhyamika tradition, acquiring an experience of emptiness or understanding from inside out is opening of the wisdom eye in a certain sense, but it also gets automatically, there's an outflow of, because of that, of compassion. So this is my understanding in that sense, that it's a logical consequence of your opening of the wisdom eye is compassion, compassionate action. And maybe it is also true in the reverse way. I wonder if, like, for example, if my compassion is awakened, will I remain a stupid human being? Because we, as we often, given the fine difference between compassion and pity and feeling bad for somebody. Compassion is not sentimental at all in that sense. Pity is sentimental and maybe foolish or stupid, but compassion requires a clear-eyedness about it. And just as wisdom can spawn into compassion, maybe compassion can also, its logical consequence can be an opening up of the wisdom eye.
Well, so basically, it reminds me, I've been mentioned this a couple of times in the past couple of years, but maybe although it's sort of now outworn, I can again repeat that what you are talking about is emptiness, realizing compassion is because it's something like this, that you have awakened from a bad dream and you know that that bad dream was just a dream. Whereas your roommate is still sleeping and he's thrashing about in his bed because he's having a nightmare. And because you know that what he is suffering is only an illusion, I'm using words very broadly and loosely, is only an illusion, which a dream of course is, you are filled with compassion because he's your friend and you say, look, poor guy is unnecessarily suffering. There is no any elephant crushing him. He's not being run over by trucks. He's not in a dungeon where the walls are closing on him. This is all illusion. Let me just wake him up gently. So it's the understanding that of the illusory nature of the world, which is the understanding that there are no true inherently existing realities, that makes you feel compassionate towards those who are still trapped in that idea. And because they are trapped in that idea, you feel compassionate. After all, we are all connected. Most of us interact with our friends, our relatives, our family. So that's where the compassion comes. Now, can compassion also lead to wisdom? That needs a little bit of reflection. Because compassion, if you are mixing it up again with, as you said, pity or fear, because you see somebody suffering and the first thought that strikes you is, oh, how do I not ever get into this situation? How should I protect myself? I mean, like in the pandemic, you could either say, well, we have to, we have to tackle this whole thing as a community, or each one just withdraw and, I will wear my mask, I will get my medicines, I will stock up. So in case anything happens, I have every dose of medicine ready with me. Never mind if there is a shortage for everybody else who's actually got COVID. So if you are going to have that sort of thing and call it compassion, it's difficult for wisdom to arise out of compassion in a sort of automatic way. But if one is reflective, is this really compassion? Why am I feeling like this? If one tries to analyze one's own motives when one feels pity or fear or compassion, even negative emotions, then maybe you will wonder. And also when bad things happen to you, I mean, how did we come to Buddhism? Because bad things happen to us. And we had to reflect and wonder why these things are happening to us. And we were looking for answers. Then you get the wisdom to, when you get the answers. Now, coming back to this thing about just recitation, whether we are talking of Lotus Sutra, whether we are talking of Pureland or any of these recitative methods, or even bhakti, the bhakt, the person who is, dedicating and completely trying to be one with God, what is the ultimate intention of that person? If the intention of that person, for instance, if there was some guru, some person who, says, so-and-so, I'm bhakt of so-and-so God or whatever, but he's, maybe even his subconscious or unconscious motivation is, people will look up to me. I will get some praise, some sort of, number of devotees who will come and fall at my feet, or something like that, Or if I express myself, I'll get some poetic imagination. And if I express myself, I may get some, literary recognition. Oh, I don't know. I can get a suitable example. The ultimate intention is to be one with God. So there's a strong faith and belief that there is a God and I can be one with him. And so I do all these activities, whether it's recitation, dancing, or singing, poetry, whatever, prayer, going into a trance, to be one, the intention. So last time we went a little bit detail into this, because in this book, for instance, and this is where Jodo Shu comes in. This is where Honen's original Pureland practice comes in, where he says recitation according to the Buddha's intention. And I listed a few examples that he has given. He says, for instance, people go to a temple, see people reciting, they sit down and recite with no particular goal in mind. They just recite. This may give you some merits, this may give you some virtue, but this is not recitation according to the Buddha's intention. Then he gives the example of those who recite because they are in danger and they are facing calamities and they are reciting to get out of that calamity, out of that difficulty, and for the well-being of themselves and their family. Such goals, although worthy, are not consonant with the Buddha's true intention. Then he says, again, to spare themselves from adversity. Then they are talking, then they hope to get a fortunate rebirth, to in future life at least be rich and without difficulty and healthy. Then in the next life, they will be reborn as a male, leaving home to be a high-ranking monk. I have walked in these morchas with these Tibetan women, and one or two of them said, you know what? I said, what are you all praying all the time with the mala? Just, like poking. They said, no, we women, we are always chanting to be born as men in the next life, so that then we can be Buddha. As women, we cannot be Buddha. I said, no, that's not so. Buddha never said that. Buddha was little opposed to allowing women to become part of the monastic order. But he never said women cannot get enlightenment. That he never said. So
Vinod has a question, Aspi.
I asked him on the chat, what is the question? I mean, he can type it if he likes.
No, please, no, just go ahead with your.
I just finish this and then you ask.
It shouldn't be a break in your conversation when I just bring in this
Okay,
point. Well, I tried to switch on the camera, but it doesn't work.
No. So just give me a minute.
So, no, the
Vinod,
question-
just give me a minute. Let me finish this
Yeah, sure.
section that I am on. Yeah. So this is one. So such a goal is not consonant with the Buddha's true intention. Even if it is to become a high-ranking monk and to teach other people and so on. What then is the true intention of the Buddhas? And he's put Buddhas as plural, mind you. The real intention of Shakyamuni Buddha, he's not saying Amitabha Buddha, mind you, of Shakyamuni Buddha is that through the Pure Land method, sentient beings may realize an early escape from the sufferings of birth and death. So he is also talking about nirvana or enlightenment. If you don't want to say enlightenment, then at least, nirvana. Escape from the cycle of birth and death. So that is the point here. Now, when you say cycle of birth and death, immediately there is the aspect of wisdom. Because then you are talking not of the problems of this world, but you're talking of a whole view of what this life and what is death and what is this whole bloody thing about. So yeah, okay, Vinod, just go ahead with your question.
Yeah,
please.
I'm just carrying on from the point where you just. I hope I'm in line with the conversation here, but it just reminds me about, I don't know how far it's in line with this conversation, but it reminds me, say, if you go back in time to say the argument that Kamalashila had with the Chinese monks, for 2 years they argued. I mean, this is what I read. That the arguments went on for 2 years, that the kind of tarka or the dialogue or whatever, they went on for 2 years, and finally there was a decision that came in favor of Kamalashila, and they know that there's good following. So I don't know whether that would throw some light on this kind of a, these ideas that are being said. There's a bhakti tradition and there's faith and other things, and also reminded of what His Holiness always says in his teachings, that the wisdom. The wisdom and compassion are like two wings. You have to have both. Unless you have both, you can't fly, you can't move. So the skillful means, I think, is a very, very important part of our practice. The skillful means becomes a very important, because he jokingly, I remember Dharmashala in McLeodganj, he jokingly remarked that he was visiting a Japanese monastery, I don't remember which one, but he's saying that they were all chanting one or few lines from the Heart Sutra or the Diamond Sutra, and we have studied the whole text, and we are taking 20, 25, 30, 40 years we work on this and we meditate on this, but still he emphasized on skillful means. That he was jokingly saying about it, but he never made a denial of the practice.
He doesn't, yeah.
Whatever, he doesn't make a denial of the practice.
Yeah, so now
the question is, my question now, pointed question would be that if you can go back and let me know about that. If you have read about something about that kind of an argument that happened between the Chinese and the Indian masters and the Tibetans going this way.
What is the argument, Vinod?
So I'll tell you.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Vinod,
asking.
Vinod, you want to know what the argument was, no?
No, I want to know. No, the argument clearly was that Kamalashila emphasized that there is a way to there is a path in the process to enlightenment, and there is nothing called an instant enlightenment that the Chinese were. So the basic things that
gradual or sudden enlightenment.
Yeah. So that argument was there. That is correct. But coming first to the second part, there is no question that the two wings of the bird completely holds correct, true view. There is no discussion, no argument there. Now, this thing about whether there is enlightenment, there is a path which became the Lamrim, stages of these paths to enlightenment, and that may take years, that may take many lifetimes, it may take aeons before you reach enlightenment, was one view. That was Kamalashila's view. And the Chinese guy, I think, were Zen guys mainly, whose view was there can be instant enlightenment. Or there can be enlightenment within one lifetime. Which also the Tantrics say. Which also some of the Nichiren Buddhists say. Now, the instant enlightenment thing is, if you have read this Tibetan Book of Living and Dying,
Yeah, I have read it. Yes.
where there is a description of Dzogchen, which is very close to the Zen thing. So the master may throw a chappal at the disciple, it hits him on the forehead, and suddenly the disciple is enlightened.
Enlightened. Yeah.
So that's an instant enlightenment. Now, or in one other case, like in the case of Marpa, go and build a tower, cut stones, and he builds the tower. Then said, now demolish the tower. Now build it again. Demolish it. So finally the man gets enlightened. He gets so exhausted, his conceptual mind is emptied out and he gets enlightened. Now, the whole argument here or the whole discussion is that I cannot throw my chappal at you to get you enlightened. I may throw a half a dozen chappals at all of you, but none of you will get enlightened. So what is the thing? The chappal is thrown by the master who knows the disciple's mind and knows that the fellow is ready. It's like everything is set up now. You have to just press the detonator, and the whole thing, and there's a blast. But before that, there may have been years of practice with this master, with other masters in previous lifetimes, which the disciple knows nothing about, nor do the actual casual observers around him know. I mean, we may all be watching this drama, disciple is falling at the feet of the master. Master says, get out, and as he's going for the chappal, and suddenly there's enlightenment. Now, what do we see as outside casual observers? Instant enlightenment. But the master knows this is not instant. He would not have thrown the chappal if the disciple was not ready. So this is one aspect. So of course, Kamala Shila did win the debate. But now enlightenment in one lifetime, which I even touched upon last time, that when you say other power and Amitabha Buddha, he clearly has said in description and in explaining this, that if you have chanted Amitabha's name with this true intention, which I just related, that you want to escape from samsara, you want to move towards awakening and enlightenment, and you are chanting with that intent, not to become rich, not to give away your problems, not to be reborn in a fortunate circumstance. If it is with this intent, then you are chanting, then at the time of death, if you still remember Amitabha Buddha as your life is easing out of your body, then he will appear before you, or he may not appear before you. There may be no vision that you will see, but he will lead you to Sukhavati. That is where the other power will come in. And that, if it happens, we can describe that as enlightenment in this life.
At the point of death.
At the point of death.
Like Charles
Nichiren writes the same thing. He says, you may be chanting Namyoho Renge-kyo all your life. But if you remember to chant it, and you really do it with this intent, not to vanquish your enemies, not to, for safety and wealth. And he says, all that will come. Even Tsongkhapa says that as long as there is one fingernail worth of land that is cultivable in the land, in the country, my monks will never go hungry. Which means that you will always get worldly goods and worldly benefits in any case as a byproduct of any practice that you do. But your intent is important. And if you are doing with this intent, you are chanting, and if you continue at your deathbed, and then you do not get rebirth again, or you get rebirth where you want to be as a bodhisattva, then we say that is enlightenment in one lifetime. It's not in one lifetime. You had many previous lifetimes too, but then it is enlightenment in this lifetime. And then, of course, the tantrics have then methods of speeding up this whole process. Not just through chanting, but very much this japa and chanting and all that is part of it, but also through meditating on the channels and meditating on death and going to the cemetery and sitting on corpses and all the tantric stuff, left-handed tantra, right-handed tantra, tantra in Los Angeles to improve your sex life, everything in one lifetime you will get.
That one I'd like to try.
Try. First get a visa. It takes 1 year to get an appointment. Not with the tantric center, but with the US government. So anyway, so this is the thing I feel, the recitation, if we just remove it from all its context and the worldview, then everything that Dominic is saying, it could just be a distraction, it could just be a placebo, it could just be a comfort. And then, of course, there is that mystical part, definitely, where there is a question of faith, and then you know that this works, and therefore there is not really faith, but knowledge and all that. So, Vinod, I don't know whether this sort of answers the question, or?
Yeah, it's sort of that. But what I was curious to know was a turning point towards Kamalashila, the Tibetan turning point towards.
Oh, I don't know the debate in detail. I don't
right.
know whether there is a detailed record of which argument and how a sort of.
I think there is a detailed account.
I have not read that. I have
No, there is. I don't know about it in English, but they definitely have a.
In Tibetan it must be there. The Chinese and Tibetan would have it, but I don't know if anybody has bothered to translate it into English.
No, the turning point would be interesting to see how they would argue this way and that way, and
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it will be interesting. When other questions?
Even this breathing, I think this concentration on the breathing itself is also one very interesting aspect, because it can be followed in all its simplicity.
Concentrate on what?
Vipassana, yeah, concentrating with shamatha and vipassana. Can be practiced even by, it's not an intellectual process at all, as Nafisa had raised. I think somebody here, yeah, I think so. So yeah, I get this point that one gets to start meditating on your breath. Anybody can do that anyway. It's not an intellectual process. You can either visualize something and keep meditating on it, or even without any visualization, you can just physically concentrate on the movement of the breath, and still be locked into some form of deep concentration.
True.
Yeah. So these are also very skillful means.
All practices.
You can build on this and then bring in all the intellectual aspects if you need to. But I'm sure there are practitioners at various levels, and from various levels they must have got enlightenment from whatever, from intellectual.
No. So see, this also. This also is a debate. Today, that debate is still going on between the Gelugpa and the Kagyu. And also with the Nyingma, that, for instance, in Gelugpa, which is the Dalai Lama's tradition, in their Shedras, in their dialectical colleges, they hardly do any meditation. They study all these texts and Prajna Parmita and the Shastra, and they do it for 13 years. And then in the 13th year, they have little meditation and chanting and all that. They are monks after all, but that is not the emphasis of the training. They do their serious meditation after 12, 13 years. Then when they try to do meditation on emptiness and directly experiencing emptiness and so on. And the Kagyu and Nyingma, they have emphasis only on meditation. They think, forget all this. Just sit down and start meditating. Observe your breath. Get single-minded, concentration. Then do vipassana. Then meditate on emptiness, compassion, whatever. Now, the argument goes like this. The Gelug say, you are saying sit down and meditate. But if you are not clear in your mind, what are you going to meditate on? You are saying meditate on emptiness. How will you meditate? You don't know what is emptiness.
Yeah.
And these fellows say that, well, for 13 years, you have been doing nothing. And now you're talking of meditation. And then the other sort of metaphor or joke about this is, the Gelugpa, tell these other people who are emphasizing meditation, saying, you are like mountaineers, you want to climb Mount Everest without any hands, You have no hands and you want to climb Mount Everest. And the other fellows say, yeah, but you know what you are? You are a mountaineer who has got 1,000 hands, and there are big baggage you have to carry up to Mount Everest with you. All your intellectual 1,000 hands you have. So both are correct, Obviously, there has to be some balance, I guess, Now, the point is, again, there are people with different sort of dispositions and attitudes, and we cannot have a prescription for everybody. I say, oh, this worked for me, so you also do it. Yeah. It's as bad as giving somebody a medicine because it worked for you.
True.